Good morning, everybody who's here. Thank you for joining us on our last day, and welcome to our first session for the day. Our speaker is our very own new SPSSI President-Elect, Linda Silka. Linda's training is as a social and community psychologist, and much of her work is focused on building community university research partnerships, which we've heard a lot about throughout the week this week. Prior to moving to the University of Maine, Linda was a faculty member for 3 decades at the University of Massachusetts Lowell, where she directed the Center for Family Work Community, served as the special assistant to the Provost for Community Outreach and Partnerships. Recent research partnerships that Linda has led include the Southeast Asian Environmental Justice Partnership and the New Ventures Partnership, the HUD-funded Community Outreach Partnership Center and Diverse Healthy Homes Initiative, and the Center for Immigrant and Refugee Community Leadership and Empowerment. During this session today, Linda is going to highlight some of the SPSSI research that has been completed over the past 85 years and suggest how we might look at what is needed for the future if our work is to continue to make a difference. And we'd like this session to be as interactive as possible, so please post both questions and comments in the chat box throughout the talk. I'm going to be keeping an eye on the chat and raising your thoughts with Linda as they come up at opportune moments. Thank you, Linda.
Great. Thank you, Andrea. And thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your busy day to be with us today. Indeed, we want this to be interactive as much as we can with this computer kind of thing, but put ideas in chat, and Andrea will be following those, and I'll keep saying to her, does anybody have anything to say? So even if you want to say, what? That's fine. So as we all are thinking about, we've reached an important point in SPSSI, and 85 years, what have we accomplished? And we're, I think, all thinking, has our work been used? Has it been useful? I mean, 85 years is a lot of work. It's aimed at science, like lots of other areas, but also at problem solving and at policy making. And have we had impacts in all those areas? And what can we learn from looking 85 years into the past? I'm trying to get my things to move here. I may need my help. There we go. And should we do anything different? Could we make more of a difference? When we look across 85 years, do we say, wow, we see this just great problem solving and building up? Or do we look at it and say, gee, are we kind of just going around in circles, and is what we're doing getting used? Do we keep on doing the same work, or perhaps make changes as we move forward? Look at some of the titles of some of the sessions that are happening in this 85th year, like asking the right questions, continuing SPSSI's legacy of social change. Have we been able to make social change? Leveraging our knowledge as researchers of social issues to create systemic change. So not just little change, but big change. Noticing, navigating, and negotiating power dynamics in community engaged research. Are we there? Do we know? Andrea and I were just talking about her great new job where she's really in the midst of working to see that people use research and that we're doing research that's useful. Is it working? And are there any things that we want to change? There are talks on poverty and class, on violence, corrections, and youth, on interracial contact, on transgender experiences, on reshaping workplaces for women, social research about policy decision-making. I mean, we still don't know exactly how to do the research, so it'll impact policy. Public psychology for the public good, the psychology of workers' rights, immigration and migration, and engaging the world. It's so exciting when we look at this conference and see how many of us are coming from different places to be here. Are we engaging the world in the work that we're doing? And this is just a few examples of the things that are being talked about. So what I first did when I said I'd like to really give this talk is I looked at our great history timeline that shows, different events that have happened across time and how SPSSI has been, people have been doing research. And another resource that I thought might be good to look at is the Journal of Social Issues. So what I've done for months is look through every issue. And although JSI doesn't go quite back to all the 85 years, it does go much of the way. And what we're going to do is take a little look at some of the topics that have been covered from our very beginning. But first, I want to read you a wonderful quote from the JSI editor in 1980, Joseph McGrath. And here's what he had to say about what we're trying to do. He said, "The fundamental issue that infused the birth and growth of JSI, namely the relation between social science and social action. JSI was founded and continues as a journal that tries to communicate the theoretical and empirical materials of science as they bear on the social problems of our time. JSI's existence, and indeed the existence of its parent organization, SPSSI, is predicated on the assumption that there's a substantial and vital relationship between social sciences and social action." And then he goes on to say, in the 36 years of JSI history, 144 issues and 13 supplements have been published. So I printed like a whole bunch of the tables of contents and the abstracts of all of those. And Larry, my poor partner, has said, "Are you reading those again?" He says, "I'm a historian of psychology, but even I'm not doing that." And so Joseph said there are more than 20,000 pages and nearly 10 million words. Almost 1,000 of those pages, nearly half of a million years, have been devoted explicitly to one topic: the relation of social science and social action. So our question is, what did we learn? So as I say here, I looked through all, so informative, so much more. And policy, social policy, is it being talked about? Is it being used? Practice? Have other disciplines used our work? Has our work made a difference? Are we still asking the same questions? And a couple of quick stories about why I'm asking a little bit about this is my career has ended up, and you can see, little things behind me, working with a lot of different disciplines. And with sadness, I report that often they say, "Really, do psychologists have something helpful to say in that area?" It's really very, very interesting. And I work a lot with policymakers, didn't expect to, really enjoy it. And often there are these interesting struggles there. So it's made me want to know all about what all of you are doing and what we can do to make sure that this great research is helpful. And so we're going to do a rapid sort of race through a number of different years. And as we do that, what I'd like to have you think about is, what year were you born? Okay, so how does this relate to what year you were born? How about your mentor? How about your mentor's mentor? So our time, of course, is very important to all of us, but as we look at what's been done, how can we think about it? First year, sort of 1945, 46 period, what do you see? And you don't have to read all of these, but you could look at it and say, oh, the causes of group antagonism. Oh, some problems on which we need more facts and some implications for action. Psychological prerequisites for sound foreign policy, intergroup relations and action programs. Could we put, instead of 1945, 46, put 1990 on that? And has all of this added up? Does it grow on each other? How about 1947? Is that a guidelines for research and international cooperation? Ego involvement in the mass media, the movies, stereotypes or realities, science and politics and plans for Puerto Rico. Next year we go to Puerto Rico. It's just so interesting to think about this. And sometimes the use of language is problematic. Army policies towards Negro soldiers, a report on a success and a failure, the Negro in the Army, a subject of research. So we see that there are some ways that we may be able to pull something out of the research, but the way it's framed may worry us. 1948, 1950, what do you see? How participation works, theoretical approaches, human dynamics, a proposed conceptual framework. How about the problem of values and the social scientist? Isn't that something we're still thinking about? Action research and the values of the social scientist. Wouldn't it be really interesting to be able to go back and read those and say, yes, we've made progress. No, we haven't made progress, but making progress may not be the answer. The answer may be to keep thinking about these kinds of themes. 1951, 52. So what strikes you about these? The ghosts of home ownership, social questions on housing and community planning, stratification in low and middle income housing areas, Spanish-speaking minorities in a Utah mining town, getting individuals to give information to the outsider, developing research partnerships. Doesn't it make you want to go back and read them and see if they answer the questions that we're still struggling with? And if we'd spent more time reading what's already been done, perhaps there would be interesting things. Andrea, are you hearing anything in the chat yet about any of these?
Well, so far we've had a shout out to Paul Kimmel. You mentioned people's birth years, and Elena points out that the eminent Mr. Kimmel is 85, just like SPSSI. So he probably has some great insights on how these research questions have evolved over the course of SPSSI's history.
That's so wonderful. I was just talking to some people here, Paul, about you and about what you're in our photo display, and you're talking about being 85, and it just makes, I think, all of us want to learn what you see as the patterns. And if you happen to be on today, do put something in chat and do share with us some thoughts.
Absolutely. And Anila also says that what's striking to her is that we're dealing with all these same issues today, all the issues that you've been reading. Though certainly we've made some progress, it's not, the issues themselves haven't changed. They keep coming.
Yeah. When I looked through these, I went through a period of feeling very sad and thinking, why is the work maybe not making as much of a difference as we hope? We've got like the first one, research to establish the conditions for peace. Why they attack intellectuals, mental illness in the family, cross-cultural education. And I thought, oh, is there no Is there not enough impact? Is there maybe a different way that we could approach these problems, or are they just really difficult problems to think about? In the work that I've been doing with a lot of the sustainability people, they talk repeatedly about having the loading dock problem, which is where we do research and we treat it like it's a thing, and we take it out to the loading dock like it's something that is an object that people are buying, and that there's somebody there to pick it up. But who's there to pick it up? Who's going to use it? And how do we address the loading dock problem if we do have that difficulty? Here, again, research to establish the conditions for peace. 1955. Could anything be more important? What strikes you about these 1963 to 67, some of the articles? Responsible and irresponsible right-wing groups, a problem in analysis, the radical right, a threat to the behavioral sciences, the behavioral scientists and social responsibility, no place to hide, manipulation of human behavior, an ethical dilemma for the social scientist, problems of power and social change, new directions of research on conflict resolution, race relations in an urbanized community, galloping technology, a new social disease. Look what we're doing. Conflict and community in the international system. So what strikes you? Anything in the chat?
Yeah, yes, we're getting a lot of comments. So Keon West says that with a few rare exceptions, for example, All Ports Major 1954 book, I almost never read anything written that long ago. So it's important to remind us of this potentially lost knowledge that we're not using.
Yes.
That's so true. That's on us as researchers, but also Abby Stewart points out that it's also a feature of the field. We're having to move so fast to put out products. And we're always having to convince journal editors that our idea is new. And so in that kind of environment, it sort of forces us to keep moving forward and not spend time looking back.
Yes, yes.
We've got a couple people, sorry. Go ahead. We've got a couple of people noticing the language that are being used in these articles and how some of the language comes off as feeling very safe and cautious, which is interesting for implications for if we're trying to influence policymakers, we have to make strategic language choices. And then Cleisha Whitlow says it's not surprising that a lot of these topics seem to be sort of recycling over and over again, because mostly white people were looking into these problems during these eras. And oftentimes the white researchers didn't experience these social dilemmas in the same way people of color were. And so maybe that's not too surprising that they weren't moving the ball forward as much as we might hope. And a lot more people are commenting on the importance of continuing to teach the history of psychology, continuing to prioritize us going back and learning the history of psychology. Some people are drawing connections to work in the 50s that was focused a lot on the Red Scare and on political ideology. And now an anti-intellectualism, we've seen those themes rise up again in sort of the George Bush, Sarah Palin, Donald Trump era. Those issues have just come right back again. And so I'm not going to read every single comment here, but there's a lot of responses, and everybody is just right on, seeming to think about these things in similar ways that you've been seeing them.
Great. Look at 68 to 69 to just continue a bit. The role of behavioral scientist in the civil rights movement. But then the next one listed here, if the social scientist is to be more than a mere technician, oh, wow. Or whatever young psychologist should know. Potential contributions of social psychological research in developing countries. Just a few of the presuppositions and perplexities, conflicting social science research in developing countries, war toys and the peace movement. 3 not so obvious contributions of psychology to peace, cognitive aspects of prejudice. Just makes me want to go see what they have to say. 75 and 76, what strikes you here? Look at some of these. Psychological attributes of policemen. Apparently there weren't police women then, but police action, community action, social psychology and crime control, the moral psychology of Watergate, the justice movement in social behavior, an attributional analysis of moral judgments, social psychological perspectives on crime and punishment, patterns of support for George Wallace, implications for racial change. Could we put a different contemporary name in there and see what's found? Fear of success, attribution of cause to the victim, and big time careers for the little women, the dual career dilemma issues. When I went on my first job interview, and many of you probably had a similar experience, the people there at the university that I won't name said, "You gave a great job talk. You're really doing interesting research. We just want you to know we don't hire little girls like you." And they didn't. What strikes you? 1981 articles, stress in the environment, air pollution and human behavior, crowding stress and human behavior, stress as in the designed community, welcome to the energy crisis, transportation energy, diffusion of energy conserving innovations, a study of women who both were raped and avoided rape, making usable information on environmental stresses, opportunities for the research and policy committees. What strikes you? Getting any thoughts from people about any of those?
Yeah, absolutely. So we've got some folks saying that we need to just debunk this view that we can't use articles past 5 to 10 years old, as citations in our research because they're now too old to be relevant. That's clearly a problematic view that is perpetuated in our field. Some folks are saying that it seems like there is an identity crisis happening in the late 60s where there's sort of questions internally about who is psychology, what is the role of psychology, and we're asking a lot of those same questions this year in this conference.
What a great point. These are such interesting comments.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And then we have one last comment here, sort of reflecting on Abby Stewart's comment earlier about the pressures of novelty when you're publishing, and saying that we really train our graduate students to learn how to justify the importance of their work by saying how new it is. And so we don't allow students to learn how to look to the past. And when you're writing a paper, we don't value people looking to past work and past accomplishments.
Very interesting. God, what interesting comments. Again, what strikes people. So monitoring social change versus survey replication, prospects and pitfalls. The behavioral scientist, insider and outsider, group membership and place meetings in an urban neighborhood, historical and political perspective, women and drug use, the legal threat as an instrument of social change, looking ahead by looking backwards, recurrent themes about social change, approaches to studying racism and sexism in Black women's lives, a theoretical perspective for understanding reactions to victimization, the threat of nuclear war, risk interpretation, and behavioral response. Isn't it surprising how much is relevant, at least in terms of the titles? So what strikes you about some 1986 articles? So the first 50 years of JSI, a variety of perspectives, continuity, change, time, method, and study. SSI and race relations in the 1950s and after, depression, war, SPSSI, SSSP, SPSSI's publication history, some facts and reflections, the effects of media violence on attitudes, emotions, and cognitions, ideology and interpretation of personal experiences, procedural justice and political analysis, reflections on American racism, the psychology of insurgency, looking toward the future by looking at the past, social activism and social history. 88, what strikes you? Right now, we've been going through periods thinking about unemployment. Look what in 1988, recent research on psychological effects of unemployment, economic stress in lives, developmental perspectives, layoffs, plant closings, worker displacement in America, bereavement is a psychosocial transition, processes of adaptation to change, monitoring the integrative complexity of American and Soviet policy rhetoric, what can be learned, conflict resolution as an alternative to terrorism, the politics of physical differences, the myth of clinical judgment, the social psychology of physical disability. So what strikes people about up to 1988?
Wow. Well, so Abby Stewart has pointed out that some of these topics, there seems to be a through line over time. For example, topics like race and gender. It would be really helpful and interesting to do an analysis of how the treatment of those topics has evolved over time or not evolved over time.
Yes.
And then for other topics, we see moments where they kind of emerge new, like energy and environmental issues kind of up at certain moments. And so it's interesting to even just analyze the emergence and continuation of these different topics.
Yes, yeah, it really is. 1990, research on homelessness, poor people, poor health, the health status of the homeless, psychology for the third world, ideology and social psychosocial research in third world contexts, underdevelopment in a North African tribe toward a psychology of peripheral social orders, social reality and social problems, the role of expectancy, psychological roots of moral exclusion, alien justice, the exclusion of Haitian refugees, extending the moral community, logical and psychological dilemmas. 1994, again, what strikes you here? Interpersonal conflict, intergroup conflict in schools and organizations, international conflict, policy and research implications, the death penalty in context, broken promise, the Supreme Court's response to social science research, capital punishment, green justice, conceptions of fairness in the natural world, finding fairness in America's cities, the search for environmental equity in everyday life, from knowledge to action. So what strikes people about those?
Wow. Well, now people are thinking about the implications of this for our teaching and graduate training programs. So some Catherine Wolf is proposing, often as teachers, when we have students write papers, we sort of tell them, stick to recent articles from the last 5 to 10 years. Maybe we need to reverse that and have some assignments where we actually require students to look back to the deeper history.
Very interesting.
And then Alina ties that to then those same pressures and instructions kind of carry through when we're going to publish our manuscripts from editors. And so we not only need to change our teaching and mentoring processes, but also the incentives that are built into our publication institutions and our editorial processes.
Very interesting. 1999 to 2000 articles, what strikes you? So social influence and social issues, the paradoxical misuse of power by those who see themselves as powerless. How does it happen? Dieting, weight, and health, reconceptualizing research and policy. are we ready to translate research into programs? So we're already up to the year 2000 and we're just asking, are we ready to translate? The construct of mindfulness towards a mindful psychological science theory and application, psychology of promoting environmentalism, new environmental theories, empathizing with nature, new environmental theories towards a coherent theory of environmentally significant behavior, new ways of thinking about environmentalism, modes of justice and environmental debate. 2004 articles. Notice I skipped years because we would be here until this evening if actually we did every year, so 50 years after Brown versus Board of Education, the promise and challenge of multicultural education. The benefits of diversity in education for democratic citizenship. Now notice this is 2004, that's a long time ago in terms of what we're allowed to report as background research in our journal articles. Developing a more inclusive social identity and elementary school intervention, interethnic contact curriculum and attitudes in the first year of college. Shift happens, I like that. You know what they're trying to say there. Spanish and English transmission between parents and their children. Students of color and European American students stigma. Perception of university instructors, learning from difference, learning to transgress, introduction to improving Arab-Jewish relations in Israel, theory and practice in coexistence educational classes. Notice that's almost 20 years ago. Children of the Troubles, the impact of political violence in Northern Ireland, women and work. Where are we? Where did we come from? And where are we going? Anybody have thoughts about those?
Yes, a lot of people are picking up this thread on the issue of language choices.
Yeah, yes.
That certain language choices, for example, phrases like third world might be alienating the people that we're trying to benefit from our research. So researchers, if we want to influence policy, we have to be really mindful of language choices. Yeah. And then Yu-Chi sort of extends that idea and says, not only are there language issues, but the pieces that we're seeing on these lists, we have to keep in mind, these were also peer reviewed and selected by editors. And so the importance, what we're seeing here is the importance of topics as seen by people in positions of power on editorial boards, not necessarily the importance of topics as seen by people in the world who need the research.
Yes, very interesting, really very interesting. 2006, 2007, again, what strikes you? So what is peace psychology, the psychology of? Restorative justice in civil society, emerging practice, theory, evidence, human behavior and environmental sustainability, driving forces and research topics, judgmental discounting and environmental risk perception, dimensional similarities, domain differences and implications for sustainability, preference for nature in urbanized societies, simulating human behavior for understanding and managing environmental resource use, waltzing with the monster, bringing research to bear on public policy, homelessness, comparative studies of multiple nations. 2011, society very definitely needs our aid, reflecting on SPSSI in history, looking again at SPSSI, history, activism, and advocacy, psychologists, race and housing in post-war America, value neutrality and SPSSI, the quest for policy, purity, legitimacy, a wrinkle in time, tracing a legacy of public science through community self-surveys and participatory action research, SPSSI and peace building, a participant's perspective, SPSSI and racial research, cautious courage, SPSSI's connections and reconnections at the UN, same-sex marriage, the social and psychological implications of policy and debates, pursuing effective integration integrated education. What do you think? What's similar? What's different? What's coming up?
Mhm. So we've got some folks. So Jeff Mariano points out that the structure of how JSI is published in terms of special issues that are all focused on one topic, and there's really only 4 thematic issues each year.
Yes.
That sort of limits the breadth of topics that can be
Yes.
at any given time.
But add some depth because you
But
get a
adds-
number of things
possibly
talking
adds
to
some
each other.
depth.
So how do we deal with those complications? But go ahead.
Mhm. No, absolutely. And then Michelle points out that generally speaking, as a field, Michelle believes we're not knowledgeable enough about the history of the social issues that we choose to study. And so if we really want to have that impact, we need to spend the time to have deeper self-education on the history of the issues we're studying.
Yeah. Very, very interesting. 2015, again, what strikes you? Psychology, history, and social justice, the social past in the personal present. Past is prologue. So you can see here, we have an issue that's got bringing in some of the history, how history becomes psychological present. Historicizing injustice, the Museum of Memory and Human Rights in Santiago, Chile. We Made History, collective 2015 memory and the legacy of the Tuskegee Airmen. Sutured identities in Jewish Holocaust survivor testimonies. How politics become personal, socio-historical events and their meanings in people's lives. History as a resource, effects of narrative construction of group history on intellectual performance. Remembrance, responsibility, and reparations, the use of emotions to talk about the 1921 Tulsa race riot. Processing cultural trauma, intergeneral effects of Japanese American incarceration. Power in history, contrasting theoretical approaches to intergroup dialogue. So here we see some pieces that are starting to try to bring in the history. 2016 to 2018, again, what strikes you? Understanding activism. Isn't that what we're about in part? Expanding psychological theories of engagement to understand activism in context. Separating social science research on activism from social science as activism. Proactive behaviors across group boundaries, seeking and maintaining positive interactions with out-group members. Tell it like it is, commemorating the 50th anniversary of Martin Luther King Jr.'s call to behavioral scientists. So has anybody called to us lately? Has anybody lately said, okay, get with it? So what do people have to say about those? What strikes people?
Well, so Emily points out that it's interesting that in this sort of group of articles, now we have more of a focus on history in these articles, more of a focus on understanding the people we seek to help.
Yes.
What they're actually going through on the ground. And Teresa suggests maybe we need to turn toward reflection on ourselves as researchers and as an organization, as SPSSI more generally.
Yes, very interesting comments. So we're going to look at some comments at this year's conference that people have made and think about sort of what that might reflect on for us. And these are just different voices, different people saying different things as I've been at different sessions. Let's bring the conversation to the data side. So people say we need more data. How can we tell the story of having the right research, but not including a much broader range of lived experiences? We need to look for different data points. When we talk to researchers, we need to say to them to step back and have them learn what is needed. So that's very interesting. We need to have data to show the broader issues. Research can show an accurate picture. We need to see the numbers in an accurate way. How can researchers do a better job of communicating to the world, to social movements? We need to share our results with organizations that are less resourced. We need to ask more critical questions, ask about issues that don't get much attention. And too often it's not a part of our training to think about how we as researchers would do a better job if our research is to be used for good. I've been doing the research since the 1960s and still need more. We need to change the system. There is a breach between academia and the street. We need to access folks in the community and not be removed. Too often we change our questions as we go through graduate school, as we move from early to late, the tendency to conform to the hegemonic model. We need to be a part of amplifying voices of the people experiencing the harm. We need better frames for research, more relevancy. And as a practitioner, I need to be able to ask specific questions to researchers. I rely on really good data. So what do people think about that? These are things that people were saying at this week's conference, and I have pages I wrote down, pages and pages. Comments? Are people making comments?
Yeah, so Yuchi points out that perhaps kind of a recurring theme as we look through how these titles are changing over time and then how they're relating to all these comments is that maybe the problem with repetition is that things in society aren't getting better. So we have to keep looking at the same issues over and over again because poverty hasn't been solved, racism hasn't been solved, war hasn't been solved. And so maybe the emphasis should be on how we can make sure our research is really used so things in society actually change. Gail Hunter points out, you asked, are people still asking us for our research? Gail Hunter points out that John Lewis urged us to continue to push for social equality as researchers. Elena asks, are we doing a better job now of listening to the communities we serve about how our work can benefit them? If we want to have an impact, maybe we need to actually ask people, what research do you need and how can we make research that helps you? And Thea points out that data is awesome, but it only goes so far without community engagement and impact. So we're seeing a lot of thoughts on this translation issue.
Yeah. Thank you. So 85 years from now, what will this conversation be? Great, we've got Paul here. You can see Paul. What do we want to do? What should we do? The same type of research that emphasizes particular types of rigor, different models of research, better understanding of how policymakers use research, accumulating findings, different approaches to bringing together research, links to other disciplines, recognizing many problems call for bringing together different disciplinary skills. In 85 years, what problems would we like to be able to say we've solved and not merely studied? And I have here down at the bottom, the example of the bus metaphor. So one year when I was at a Centers for Disease Control conference that was community people focused on research and on health research and researchers kind of focused in that area and people who had grants working together. And the most powerful statement that came about 2/3 of the way through the conference was made by a community leader. And she stood up and she said, okay, wait a minute. We've all heard a lot here. And to me, what we need to think about here is a bus. We need to think about a bus metaphor, she said. So think about how we've got the research is like a bus. Who's driving the bus? Who's putting the gas in the bus? People are getting on and off the bus at different times. How do they learn from each other? What is the destination for the bus? And she looked at all of us researchers and said, your destination is more research. And this was on children's research, children's health. She said, your goal is more research. Our goal is to have our children's lives get better. How are we going to put these together to make a difference? Mm-hmm. Lisa Brunner's wonderful keynote said that one of the most important things we can do is be a good ancestor. So how do we think about that in SPSSI? And Dr. Dutta in her talk said, the past is not background. Let's foreground it. Let's think about, all of these things. Just is current research building? Is our research making a difference? Is it making enough of a difference? And how can we deal with our challenges, the expectation in academia of research and publication that meets certain expectations? The links between researchers and policymakers remain fraught, and the problems stay the same and keep changing. So at what level do we focus our research? What do we do? And those are my thoughts. And I can't wait to talk to all of you about your thoughts, whether it's in chats, whether it's one of the things I'm thinking about, Larry and I are thinking about as a possibility during the my year with SPSSI is possibly doing a little road trip and going to some of your campuses. I can't go easily drive my van across the ocean, but at least in Canada and the US, visiting some campuses and learning about what you're thinking about. Larry is a wonderful, wonderful person, historian of psychology, and is really surprised every time he hears that we as social and community psychologists don't quite know all the great work and all the great people that are doing things. So do we have final thoughts from people where we have just a little bit of time left?
Yeah, absolutely. So I just first want to make my own personal comment to react to what you just said. And I had a very powerful experience in prepping for this conference where I suddenly had this humbling moment of realizing that I had no idea of most of the history because, we put together our co-chair welcome video and we did a little sort of video recreation of the SPSSI timeline that's on the website.
And it was wonderful. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. But the process of making that video was so much fun and so educational because there were all these amazing stories from SPSSI's past that I just had no clue about. And it was a sort of eye-opening to even just do this very surface level, shallow survey of some of the highlights of the history. And I imagine if we looked even deeper, probably my mind would be blown about all the things that were going on in the past that I thought were new now.
Yeah, so interesting. Yeah.
So I've been having that experience personally. And so for those of you listening who haven't yet watched the video, definitely go back and check out our welcome video and our little walk through history. And we're going to make a version of that's just the history portion to put on the timeline website so that you can watch it in the future.
And the event this afternoon at 4, celebrating the 85th, come to that. Yes. That's going to be another way we can all learn and
absolutely
learn.
The film screening and the trivia session afterwards are very educational. So in the chat, we've got a lot of chatters. So picking up on this theme of making sure that we are following the direction of the people we're trying to help in line with your bus metaphor. Claudia says that, we want to avoid paternalistic sort of humanitarian approach to our research. And so we can't assume we know what people need out in the real world. We need to ask them and have them guide our research directions. And then Ty also adds to that and says, how can we also ensure that our research is not misused, misinterpreted, or essentialized?
Important question.
Yeah, sometimes we put data out there and it's
Yeah.
used for harm.
Yeah.
Ben, I think, asks a really great question. Another way to sort of phrase some of these questions you're asking, Linda. And he says, looking back in 85 years, after another 85 years, what research questions are we going to ask ourselves? Hey, this was such a huge phenomenon or a huge problem developing in society. Why were people not researching this back then? So are we
Big question.
enough attention to what are the important issues in the first place? Are we missing important issues and questions? And that really ties back to Keon's talk about asking the right research questions and where are we pulling those questions from?
Yes, yes.
Lots of people are tying this back to Keon's talk.
Great.
Ty wants to add to the bus metaphor. Who's allowed to drive the bus and under what context? Who owns the bus company? Are we able to purposefully address those questions now?
Yes.
So important. Many, many people are saying that they love the idea of having a Linda tour.
Great.
Linda stops into town to visit them. So you're getting a lot of support for that idea, and you might start getting a lot of requests for stops all over the place.
Wonderful.
And let's see. Ryan Pickering says, I feel so privileged to have taken history of psychology with Larry. So that's
and Larry and I both feel just so fortunate to have been on Ryan's dissertation committee. It was a great dissertation, and his dissertation was the first one we were both on, the first committee that we in all our years. The first time Larry and I got to see, Larry, Ryan may know this story, but one time when I was writing a grant proposal and I was just frantic, I wasn't getting it done, Larry went in to teach my class, and he did a much better job teaching my class, getting information across. It was so depressing.
Yeah, that's a good problem to have, though, when you have an amazing guest.
Yes, yes.
Very humbling, but a great experience.
Yeah.
So right now I want to unmute Paul Kimmel. He would like to
great.
make a comment out loud. Go
Super.
ahead. Paul, I believe you're unmuted. So if you want to go ahead and talk now, you can.
Okay. I can see you. Can you hear me?
Yep,
Yes.
We can hear you just fine.
Okay. The technology is another big issue for us older folks.
Yes, me too.
I'm having a very hard time getting on and figuring out what day I'm on and which session I'm in. And so most of the time I'm getting these secondhand or later. I once said technology is not the solution, it's the problem.
You're
And
right.
we need an old folks system to let people from my generation and even 10 or 15 years younger be able to really get in and do these things. I sent you a chat way back when you said, what do I have to say? But it didn't get there because my browser doesn't support the chat. So this is part of the problem. Let me say something in response to what you asked about 85 years ago. I was born 5 months ahead of SPSSI. And the first thing that happened when I finished my dissertation at Michigan was Dan Katz, my chairman, who's been very active and was the first secretary treasurer of Division 9, said, now we've got to get you into SPSSI. So I've been in SPSSI right out of the box when I didn't even know what it was at the time. My career started in academia, and I found that to be not very satisfying. I was talking to people who were trying to get a grade or wanted to make more money or anything but listen to how you got involved and changed whatever issue you are on. So when I had a chance to start working for the government, I quickly took it and I went to Washington, DC, and I was there for 35 years. I mostly have done evaluations. And when you do evaluations, what you find is you've got to start with the user who's paying you to do the evaluation. And when you start there, instead of how do I get ahead, or how do I make a career, or how do I whatever, you have a very different frame of reference. And that's what I've had for years. It's not so hard sometimes to get the evaluation in place. What's really hard is after you get the data and you tell them what they need. And I'm talking about groups like the Veterans Administration, where I did an evaluation of their healthcare, to get them to actually use the information if it doesn't fit what they want. Very often, the people who sponsor you and the policymakers who say they want to listen to you really want you just to give them something that confirms what they're already doing. You have to really think about that when you start working with policymakers. If you want to change them, you've got to start from a very different place than their place or your place. You got to start somehow from where you're trying to get to. And I called that a long time ago, public interest science. Don't worry about your goals and your research. Don't worry about their goals and their research. Worry about what you think systems need, whether small group or society or the world, and try to frame the questions you ask and the way you gather your data in a way that will lead to that happening. I'm not sure I've been very successful with it, but I called it public interest science. I've written about it, and we did manage to get the APA to sign on to the US Institute of Peace legislation a long time ago when I was the first policy fellow. So if you work that way, you can sometimes get a little further, but working with the client, working with your own goals, really, in my experience, has not been very useful to get social change. That's my point.
Very important, very interesting. And what a great way to end this session, to have us all keep thinking about what you've just said. And I mean, we hopefully, I don't know who all is here, but I hope we have graduate students here and new faculty and older faculty and partners, and think about what you just said and how are we either going to argue with you or agree with you and do something about what you just said.
Thank you, Linda.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So we have reached the end of our time, and the 11:45 Eastern time symposium sessions are starting now. But I just want to give Linda one chance to sort of, are there any closing thoughts or anything you want to leave our participants with before we head out?
I want to thank you, Andrea, for being such a great facilitator. And thank everybody for taking the time to come.
Thank you, everybody. All right. And thank you, Linda. We look forward to your upcoming year as president.
Thank you.
And the Linda tour.
Yeah, thank you.
All righty. Bye-bye, everybody.